And the modern secular state has replaced the Khilafah. And all of mankind, illa masha'Allah, have pledged their allegiance to the modern secular state, loyal to the modern secular state and to its constitution. And as a consequence have said goodbye to Allah and to the Khilafah. The modern secular state says, no, Allah is not Al-Malik. Sovereignty does not reside with Allah. Sovereignty resides with this state. The people are sovereign, not the Lord who created them. You don't need a PhD to understand that that is shirk. And that's the one sin that Allah will never forgive.
Mr. Cameron, this week you went to Indonesia and gave one of the most hypocritical and dishonest speeches I have ever heard in my life. It was dishonest because you went there to sell them guns, bombs, planes, but also to flog them democracy. To sell it like a second-hand car salesman sells a faulty car. No brakes, faulty engine, but go on, take it. Take it for a drive. Take this democracy, which you didn't tell them back in Britain is increasingly getting a more and more soiled name. Democracy, you didn't tell them, mixes money and power like no other political system. Go and ask them in Russia, where Putin is famous for corruption. Go and ask them in India, where corruption is rife. Ask them in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Iraq, Afghanistan. Everywhere you go, democracy mixes money and power and corrupts politicians. And that's what you told them to have in Indonesia. That was the lie you sold them. And as for the hypocrisy, when you started to say that the people of the Middle East want freedom and the authoritarian regimes are against democracy, you never told them that you backed those authoritarian regimes. Last year you went to sell them arms like you're selling arms in Indonesia today. You didn't tell them when you walked arm in arm with Aung San Suu Kyi that British government rendered Abdul Hakim Belhaj from Libya to be tortured. You didn't tell them that in Britain you lock up Muslims, your minority population, you lock them up for 7 or 8 years without a charge, without a trial, without showing them any evidence, like in the case of Babar Ahmed. And then you have the gall to tell them that you stand for freedom and democracy. People don't listen to your words, they watch your actions. Islam protects minorities. Islam protects the rule of law. Islam obliges them to account the ruler. Islam does all of this in the Khilafah system. And they know you back the regimes in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, all over the world that crush the people who try to re-establish this Islam through peaceful means. And they know you do this because you fear the day that Islam is established in the Khilafah, because you will lose control over the resources of the Muslim world that you crave after so much. And that's why one day, inshallah ta'ala, you will see the inevitable re-establishment of the caliphate in the Muslim world.
Capitalism today actually has failed. You know, look at the global financial crisis. So what is the alternative? We've tried everything in the Muslim world. You know, I think Muslims are very clear nowadays that Saudi Arabia really is far from an example of the implementation of Allah's Sharia. It is not the caliphate, it's not the Khilafah. It's a kingship, it's a monarchy, which we don't have. This was created by the British. And so today, you know, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Sudan, these governments have been exposed that they pay lip service to the Sharia. And actually to enter in the Muslim world, people think if there is a ruler who cares only about Islam, he will send the army to defend the people of Gaza, which the Saudi government never did. He will use this huge wealth, this huge oil resource for the Ummah, so that Somalia down the road, where our brothers and sisters are starving, will be catered for. This is what the Khilafah did and would do, and this is something that all the so-called states today actually failed to do. To re-establish the Caliphate is an Islamic obligation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran very clearly that it is a duty for Muslim societies to be governed by the Sharia of Allah. It was not revealed for Muslims to put on a shelf. And that's why the call for the Caliphate has always been a clearly understood obligation.
What is the Khilafah state? The Khilafah state is a state established for the first time by Nabi Dawood alayhi salam in the Holy Land, the holy state of Israel, restored in Medina by Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. The Khilafah state is a state which recognizes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Al-Malik, as the king. Whereas in political terminology, it should be translated as a sovereign. So sovereignty in the Khilafah state resides with Allah. The modern secular state says no. No, Allah is not Al-Malik. Sovereignty resides with the state. The people are sovereign, not the Lord who created them. You don't need a PhD to understand that that is shirk. And that's the one sin that Allah will never forgive. It's a wake-up call for us to make tawbah before it's too late. The Khilafah state recognizes Allah's authority as supreme. He is Al-Akbar. The modern secular state says no. The authority of the state is supreme. There is no authority above the state. And the states are all organized under the United Nations organization. And the authority of the Security Council of the United Nations is Al-Akbar, not Allah. The Khilafah state says that Allah is Al-Hakam, the supreme lawmaker. His law is the supreme law. And when He says haram, no one can make it halal. And when He says halal, no one can make it haram. There is a verse of the Quran which declares that to be shirk, to legalize and make legal what Allah has made haram. That is shirk. The modern secular state says no, Allah is not Al-Hakam. Parliament is Al-Hakam. Parliament makes the law. And the law that comes from Parliament and the law that comes from the United Nations is the supreme law. The modern secular state says that Allah can make it haram, but we can make it halal. And everything, or almost everything, because we have not reached New York as yet. In New York they now legalize the marriage of a man with a man. And yet you want this, you want your green card, to become an American citizen, so go and stay there and never come back. Those are your people, not ours. The modern secular state says Allah can make it haram, but we can legalize it. Shall I give you some examples? Did you know that Allah prohibited money being lent on interest? Did you know that? Huh? You know that? And did you know that Allah has declared war? War on the money lender lending money on interest? Did you know that? And did you know that Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam has cursed all four and declared that they are all equally guilty? The one who takes riba, the one who gives riba, the one who records the transaction, and the two witnesses? Did you know that he said that riba is constituted of 70 different parts, and the smallest part of riba is equivalent to a man marrying his own mother. And do you know what the modern secular state has done? Even in Saudi Arabia, all around the world, they've made it halal. Don't believe me? There's something called a bank outside there in Subang Jaya. Go and ask them whether they lend money on interest. I can go on and on and on and on. This is a substitute for the Khilafah.